Mary Clark thought her cozy home was a fortress, but her new neighbor Linda shattered her world. Anonymous letters, lies spreading through town, and the chilling feeling of being watched. Mary Clark sat on the porch of her house in the suburbs of Boulder, Colorado, holding a cup of cold coffee. Her gaze wandered over the perfectly manicured lawns and vibrant flower beds she loved to tend. This neighborhood, known for its cozy homes and friendly neighbors, was her pride. She had bought this house 5 years ago, after a painful divorce, pouring all her savings and soul into it. But the last 2 weeks had turned everything upside down. The life she had so carefully built was unraveling, and one person was to blame, her new neighbor, Linda West. Mary sighed, recalling how it all began. Linda had appeared in their neighborhood a month ago, buying the house across the street. At first glance, she seemed perfect, smiling, well-groomed, with impeccable manners. She brought Mary a basket of homemade cookies and said she had moved from Denver, seeking a quiet life. Mary, always welcoming to new faces, invited her for tea and even introduced her to other neighbors. But something about Linda was unsettling. Her smile was too wide, her compliments too rehearsed. Mary brushed off these thoughts, blaming herself for being overly suspicious. The first warning bell rang a week later. Mary noticed that her colleagues at the office, where she worked as a marketer for a small company, started acting strangely. They whispered behind her back, and her best work friend, Sarah, avoided conversations. Mary attributed it to stress from a new project, but soon received an email from her boss, Ellen. The email mentioned a complaint from an anonymous employee, accusing Mary of unethical behavior, claiming she had stolen a colleague's idea and passed it off as her own. Mary was stunned. She had never done anything like that. Her reputation at the company was spotless, and she prided herself on her integrity. She immediately went to Ellen to explain, but her boss was cold. "We'll investigate," she said, "but for now, you should take a leave." Mary returned home, feeling the ground slip from under her feet. She couldn't understand who would frame her or why. The next day, things got worse. Her neighbor from the other end of the street, Clara, called and asked if it was true that Mary was selling her house. Mary nearly dropped the phone. "What sale? I'm not going anywhere." Clara, embarrassed, said she heard it from Linda, who claimed Mary had told her herself. Mary felt anger rising in her chest. She decided to confront Linda, but Linda didn't answer the door, though her car was in the garage. That evening, Mary received another blow. The Homeowners Association sent a letter warning her about a violation. Someone had complained that she was keeping trash in her yard, ruining the neighborhood's appearance. Mary went outside and inspected her yard. Everything was pristine, no trash in sight. She began to suspect Linda was behind it, but she had no proof. The following days became a nightmare. At the company, the investigation dragged on, and even colleagues she used to lunch with started ignoring her. Sarah finally admitted that rumors about Mary were spreading not only in the office but around town. Someone claimed Mary had a criminal past, which was a complete lie. Mary couldn't sleep, haunted by the question, why was Linda doing this? She recalled their conversations and suddenly remembered how Linda had asked about her house, its price, and mortgage. At the time, it seemed like innocent curiosity, but now Mary suspected Linda wanted her house. Boulder was a prestigious city, and real estate in their neighborhood was skyrocketing. Mary decided to dig deeper. She called her friend Lisa, who worked at City Hall, and asked her to check for any unusual requests regarding her house. Lisa promised to look into it. Meanwhile, Mary noticed Linda attending more neighborhood gatherings, spreading stories about how Mary supposedly complained about the area and dreamed of moving. It was absurd, but neighbors believed Linda, who knew how to play the victim. Mary felt increasingly isolated. Even Clara, once her friend, started avoiding her. A week later, Lisa called with news. Someone had submitted a request to the city council to verify the legality of Mary's homeownership. The request was anonymous, but Lisa noticed it came from an email linked to Linda's address. Mary felt her stomach tighten. Linda wasn't just spreading rumors, she was trying to undermine Mary's property legally. Mary decided to act. She ordered a small security camera and installed it to capture her yard and part of the street. If Linda was up to something, Mary wanted evidence. The next day, she went to the office and asked Ellen for a chance to explain. She showed her work notes, proving the project idea was hers. Ellen agreed to review the evidence, but said the complaint came from outside the company. Mary immediately thought of Linda. Back home, she checked the camera footage. One clip showed Linda, late at night, tossing a bag of trash into Mary's yard and photographing it. Mary clenched her fists. It was proof, but not enough to take Linda down. She needed a plan. She recalled Linda boasting about her successful business in Denver. Mary decided to verify her story. She contacted an old acquaintance, Tom, a private detective. Tom agreed to look into Linda's past for a small fee. While waiting for news, things worsened. Mary was fired, with the company citing reputational risks. Ellen apologized but said the external pressure was too strong. Mary knew it was Linda. She had lost not only her job but the respect of neighbors who now saw her as trouble. But Mary wasn't giving up. She started watching Linda, noticing her frequent evening trips. One day, Mary followed her to a cafe in downtown Boulder, where Linda met a man in an expensive suit. Mary photographed them but couldn't identify him. She sent the photo to Tom, hoping he'd figure it out. A few days later, Tom called with shocking news. Linda wasn't who she claimed to be. Her real name was Emily Rose, and she had a fraud conviction in Denver. She had tried several real estate scams, posing as someone else. Mary felt everything fall into place. Linda wanted to ruin her reputation to force her to sell the house cheaply, then buy it through a proxy. Mary knew it was time to act. She began planning a neighborhood party to expose Linda publicly. She rented a projector and gathered all her evidence, camera footage, documents from Lisa, and Tom's findings. The party would be her triumph. The day before, Linda came to Mary's house, smiling as if nothing was wrong. She said she heard about the party and offered to help organize it. Mary barely contained her anger but agreed to avoid suspicion. She knew Linda would attend, and that would be her mistake. On the day of the party, Mary was on edge. She double-checked everything. The projector worked. The files were ready. Neighbors gathered in her yard, laughing and drinking wine. Linda arrived in a bright dress, charming everyone. Mary waited until they relaxed, then turned on the projector. Footage of Linda tossing trash into her yard appeared on the screen. The neighbors fell silent. Mary calmly explained it was just the beginning. She showed documents proving Linda's fraudulent past and detailed her attempts to seize the house. Linda tried to defend herself, but Mary played a recording of their last conversation, where Linda carelessly hinted at her plans. The neighbors were stunned. Clara approached Mary, apologizing for believing the rumors. Linda fled the yard, and the next day, her house was listed for sale. Mary reclaimed her reputation, and a month later, she was invited back to work. She sat on the same porch, holding a fresh cup of coffee, and smiled for the first time in ages. Her house, her life, belonged to her again. Mary stood in the kitchen, washing dishes after the party that changed everything. Her yard still smelled of barbecue, and leftover cakes from neighbors cluttered the table. Last night had been her triumph. Linda, or rather Emily Rose, was exposed to everyone, her lies crumbling like a house of cards. Mary felt relief but also unease. Linda had vanished, and though her house was already for sale, Mary didn't believe the con artist would give up so easily. She knew people like her. They always came back for revenge. Mary dried her hands with a towel and glanced out the window. The street was quiet, but the silence felt suspicious. She decided to check the mailbox, hoping for no new surprises. Inside was a single envelope with no return address. Mary tore it open and pulled out a sheet with printed text. "You'll regret starting this war." No signature, but Mary knew who sent it. Her heart pounded. She returned to the house and locked the door, though she knew locks wouldn't stop Linda if she wanted to act. Mary sat at her laptop and reviewed the evidence she'd presented at the party. Videos, documents, recordings, everything was safely stored in the cloud. She sent copies to Tom, her detective friend, asking him to keep them in case something happened. Tom replied quickly, assuring her everything was under control but advising her to contact the police. Mary hesitated. She had no direct proof that Linda was threatening her, and the anonymous letter could just be intimidation. But she couldn't ignore the feeling that danger was near. The next day, Mary drove to downtown Boulder to meet Lisa, her friend from City Hall. Lisa invited her to a small cafe on Pearl Street, where they could talk privately. Mary told her about the letter, and Lisa frowned. She said she'd heard from a neighbor that Linda was seen near Mary's house at night after the party. It could have been a coincidence, but Lisa urged Mary to be cautious. She also mentioned finding another document tied to Linda. Apparently, Linda had tried to file a request to rezone the neighborhood to lower property values. Mary was shocked. Linda wasn't just after her house, she planned to ruin the entire area to buy homes cheaply. It was a grand scheme, and Mary felt her anger return. She thanked Lisa and promised to keep her updated. Back home, Mary noticed her security camera blinking red. She checked the footage and saw someone in a dark hoodie near her fence at night. The face wasn't visible, but Mary was certain it was Linda. She saved the clip and decided to install another camera closer to the street. For the next few days, Mary tried to return to normal life. She was invited back to work, but the office atmosphere remained tense. Colleagues apologized, but Mary felt trust was broken. Sarah, her friend, suggested working on a new project together to restore Mary's reputation, but Mary couldn't focus. Her thoughts were consumed by Linda. She started noticing small things, A car slowly driving past her house, strange noises at night. Mary decided to talk to Clara, a neighbor who became an ally after the party. Clara invited her for tea and revealed that Linda had left her a key to her house before leaving, asking her to look after it. Mary grew wary. She asked to see the key and noticed a small real estate company logo on the keychain. It was the same logo she'd seen on the car of the man Linda met at the cafe. Mary photographed the keychain and sent it to Tom. She felt the puzzle coming together. Tom called the next day with news. The man from the cafe was a real estate agent named Richard Kane, known for working on the edge of the law, helping buy homes at low prices. Tom also learned that Linda had a deal with him to earn a commission for every house in the neighborhood they could acquire. Mary felt her blood boil. Linda didn't just want her house, she planned to destroy the entire area for profit. Mary decided this time she wouldn't just expose Linda, she'd destroy her plans for good. She began preparing her next move. The first step was to gather the neighbors and tell them the truth. Mary organized a meeting at the local community center, inviting everyone in the area. She prepared a presentation with evidence, documents from Lisa, camera footage, and Tom's information. At the meeting, neighbors were shocked. Many recalled Linda telling them the neighborhood was losing value and urging them to sell. Some had even received letters from Richard Kane with buyout offers. Mary called for everyone to unite and file a collective complaint with the city council. The neighbors agreed, and Clara suggested creating a social media group to coordinate efforts. Mary felt, for the first time in a long while, that she wasn't alone. But Linda didn't back down. 2 days after the meeting, Mary received another letter. This time, it contained a photo of her house, taken from inside. Mary felt her blood run cold. Someone had been in her home. She checked all the locks, they were intact. She called the police, but without direct evidence, they could do nothing. Mary decided to take matters into her own hands. She asked Tom to install hidden motion-activated cameras in her house. She also contacted a local journalist, Eric, who wrote about real estate fraud. Eric was intrigued by the story and promised to conduct his own investigation. While waiting for news, Mary noticed Linda had returned to town. Her car was spotted near Kane's office. Mary decided to follow her. She borrowed Sarah's car to stay unnoticed and drove downtown. Linda entered Kane's office and emerged an hour later with a large folder. Mary photographed her and sent the pictures to Eric. She knew Linda was planning something new, and she couldn't let her win. The next day, Eric called with news. He'd found a witness who worked with Kane and was willing to reveal how he and Linda manipulated the real estate market. The witness, a former assistant to Kane, agreed to an interview if his name was kept secret. Mary felt this was her chance. She asked Eric to arrange a meeting with the witness while she continued tracking Linda. One evening, she saw Linda enter her yard. Mary activated the cameras via her phone and watched as Linda left a box by the door. Mary didn't open it and called the police. The box contained documents claiming Mary's house was built with violations. The police took the box, but Mary knew it was another attempt by Linda to intimidate her. She sent the camera footage to Eric, who included it in his article. A week later, Eric's article was published in the local paper. It detailed Kane and Linda's scheme, with evidence from the witness and Mary's footage. Boulder residents were outraged. Neighbors picketed Kane's office, and the city council announced a review of all his deals. Linda vanished from town, but Mary knew she'd return. She continued working with Eric and the neighbors to protect the neighborhood. Her house became a symbol of resistance, and she felt she'd finally regained control. But one evening, while checking her mailbox, Mary found another letter. It contained a single sentence: "This isn't over." Mary held the new letter, her fingers trembling. "This isn't over." The words, printed in bold font, felt like a verdict. She stood on the threshold of her Boulder home as the evening Colorado air chilled her skin. Linda, or Emily Rose, as she was truly called, had reminded her of her presence. Mary knew this woman wouldn't stop until she destroyed everything dear to her. She closed the door, checking the locks twice, and placed the letter on the kitchen table. Her eyes fell on the security camera blinking green. The footage might reveal who left the letter, but Mary wasn't in a hurry to check. She felt a new plan was needed, and this time, she wouldn't let Linda play on her turf. Mary called Tom, her detective friend, and told him about the letter. Tom was concerned. He said Linda was likely hiding nearby, perhaps in Denver, and advised Mary to install an alarm system. She agreed but asked Tom to check if Linda had appeared in other Colorado cities. If she was planning a new scheme, she might have left traces. Tom promised to dig deeper and contact his police connections. Mary thanked him and sat at her laptop. She opened the social media group the neighbors created after her community center presentation. It already had over 100 members, and people were actively sharing information. Someone wrote about a call from a real estate agent offering to buy their house at a low price. Another neighbor, Mike, mentioned seeing a car similar to Richard Kane's near the park. Mary responded, urging everyone to stay vigilant and send her any suspicious details. She sensed Linda and Kane were preparing something big, and this time, she had to stay one step ahead. The next day, Mary met Eric, the journalist who published the article about Linda's fraud. They sat in his office, cluttered with papers and coffee cups. Eric said that after the article, two people contacted him, claiming they were victims of Kane in another city. They described how he used proxies to force owners to sell homes cheaply. Eric suspected Linda was one of those proxies, but he needed proof. Mary suggested setting a trap. She knew Linda was watching her and could use that against her. Eric agreed to help but warned it could be dangerous. Mary nodded. She had crossed the line of fear and was ready for anything. Back home, Mary checked the camera footage. One clip showed someone in dark clothing leaving the letter at her door. The face wasn't visible, but Mary noticed a bracelet on their wrist. It was the same bracelet she'd seen on Linda during their last encounter. She saved the clip and sent it to Eric and Tom. Then she called Clara, her neighbor, and asked for help organizing another neighborhood meeting. Mary wanted to warn everyone about Linda's potential new scheme and gather more information. Clara agreed and suggested holding the meeting at her house to avoid attention. Mary thanked her and began preparing new slides for the presentation. She included the bracelet photo and asked neighbors to recall if they'd seen anything similar. The next evening, Clara's house was full of people. Neighbors brought food and drinks, but the atmosphere was tense. Mary shared the letter and showed the camera footage. Mike, who had seen Kane's car, said he noticed the same bracelet on a woman walking in the park. Another neighbor, and added that she received a threatening letter after refusing to sell her house. Mary realized Linda was expanding her game, intimidating not just her but others. She proposed creating a neighborhood patrol system to monitor suspicious activity. The neighbors supported the idea, and Mike volunteered to coordinate schedules. Mary returned home feeling she wasn't alone, but the anxiety lingered. She checked her mailbox and found another letter. This time, it contained a photo of herself, taken at the cafe where she met Lisa. Mary felt panic rising. Linda was following her, and it was more serious than she thought. She called Tom and asked him to check if Linda had hired someone to tail her. Tom said it was possible and suggested Mary temporarily stay with a friend. Mary refused. She didn't want to flee her house. Instead, she ordered another camera, this time with facial recognition, and asked Tom to install it as soon as possible. While waiting for Tom's updates, Mary decided to talk to Sarah, her colleague. Sarah invited her to lunch at a restaurant in downtown Boulder. During their conversation, Mary shared the new threats, and Sarah admitted she'd heard someone at the office mention Linda. Apparently, Linda had called the company, posing as a journalist, asking about Mary. This explained why the office investigation dragged on. Mary asked Sarah to talk to Ellen, their boss, and tell her the truth. Sarah promised to try but warned that Ellen was still under pressure. Mary thanked her and returned home, feeling Linda was attacking from all sides. 2 days later, Tom called with news. He'd found someone who worked for Kane and followed Mary. It was a young man named Jake, who agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Jake revealed that Linda paid him for photos and minor intimidation acts, like the letters. Tom passed the information to the police, and Mary felt relief. But she knew Linda wouldn't stop until caught. Mary decided to use Jake to lure Linda into a trap. She contacted Eric and suggested staging a fake real estate deal. The plan was for Jake to contact Linda and say Mary was ready to sell her house cheaply due to pressure. Mary hoped Linda would take the bait and show up in person. Eric supported the plan and said he'd record everything with a hidden camera for his next article. Mary also asked Tom to be on standby in case things went wrong. The plan worked. Jake called Linda, and she agreed to meet at Kane's office. Mary knew this was her chance. She prepared documents that supposedly confirmed the sale and gave them to Jake. Eric set up cameras in the office, and Tom waited nearby with police officers. Mary stayed home, nervously checking her phone. She knew she couldn't be at the meeting to avoid suspicion. 2 hours later, Eric called and said Linda had shown up. She signed the documents, thinking she was getting Mary's house, but the police arrested her instead. The cameras captured her admitting to fraud, believing she was talking to Kane. Mary felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She thanked Eric and Tom, but asked them to keep it quiet until the article was published. A week later, Eric's article became a sensation in Boulder. Linda was charged with fraud, intimidation, and document forgery. Kane also came under investigation, and his office was shut down. Neighbors threw a party in Mary's honor, thanking her for saving the neighborhood. Mary stood in her yard, holding a glass of wine, and felt peace for the first time in a long while. But she knew she'd always stay vigilant. Her house, her life, were her fortress, and she'd never let anyone take them away. Mary woke to a faint creak in the house. Her heart raced, though she quickly recalled that Linda was behind bars. 2 weeks had passed since the arrest, and Boulder was slowly returning to its usual rhythm. Eric's article had made Mary a local hero, and neighbors now greeted her like their savior. But that creak at night reminded her that peace could be deceptive. She got out of bed, turned on the light, and checked the windows and doors. Everything was in place, but a small note on the kitchen table caught her eye, one she didn't remember seeing. It had a single word: surprise. Mary felt a chill. She checked the security cameras but found nothing suspicious. The note could have been left by a guest from last night's dinner, but Mary didn't believe in coincidences. She called Tom and asked him to come over. Tom arrived within an hour, holding coffee and a laptop. He examined the note carefully and said it might be a prank but should be checked. He took it for fingerprint analysis and suggested Mary stay at a hotel temporarily. Mary refused. She didn't want to flee her hard-won home again. Instead, she asked Tom to investigate if Linda had unknown accomplices. Tom nodded and promised to contact his police connections. After he left, Mary sat at her laptop and opened the neighbor's social media group. She posted a brief message, asking if anyone had noticed anything odd in the area. Responses poured in immediately. Clara wrote that she'd seen an unfamiliar car parked near her house for several nights. Mike added that someone tried to tamper with his mailbox. And another neighbor mentioned a strange call from someone claiming to be a real estate agent. Mary felt her suspicions confirmed. Linda might be in jail, but her plan seemed to live on. Mary decided to talk to Eric, the journalist who helped expose Linda. They met at his favorite cafe on Pearl Street, where Eric waited with a fresh stack of documents. He said that after Linda's arrest, a man contacted him, claiming to have worked with Richard Kane. His name was Paul, and he was one of the agents who helped Kane buy homes. Paul revealed that Linda had a partner no one knew about, someone who stayed in the shadows but controlled the operation. Eric showed Mary a photo of Paul, and she remembered seeing him at Kane's office when she followed Linda. Mary felt her insides tighten. She asked Eric to arrange a meeting with Paul, though he warned that Paul feared for his life. Mary insisted, saying she was willing to take the risk. Back home, she noticed her garden looked different. Several flower beds were trampled, and a decorative lantern was broken. Mary checked the cameras and saw a masked figure wandering her yard at night. She saved the footage and sent it to Tom. Her patience was wearing thin. She called Clara and asked her to gather the neighbors for an urgent meeting. This time, she wanted not just to warn them, but to organize a real resistance. The meeting took place at the community center, and the room was packed. Mary shared the new threats and showed the camera footage. She said Linda might not have acted alone and urged everyone to check their homes and report suspicious activity. Mike suggested hiring private security for the neighborhood, and the neighbors agreed. Clara added that she could talk to her brother, who worked at a security firm. Mary felt the neighborhood uniting like never before. After the meeting, she returned home and found another note, this time under her door. It read, "You won't stop us." Mary felt her anger overpower her fear. She called Eric and said she was ready to meet Paul as soon as possible. Eric arranged the meeting at a remote cafe outside Boulder. Mary arrived early in the morning, carrying a recorder and a phone with the recording on. Paul looked nervous, constantly glancing around. He revealed that Linda's partner was a man named Victor Gray, a wealthy investor from Denver. Gray funded all of Kane and Linda's schemes but never appeared publicly. Paul said Gray planned to continue buying homes in Boulder, even after Linda's arrest. Mary recorded every word and asked Paul to testify to the police. He hesitated but agreed if guaranteed protection. Mary thanked him and immediately called Tom. She told him about Gray, and Tom said the name had come up in another fraud case. He promised to pass the information to the police and urged Mary to be careful. Back home, Mary noticed her mailbox had been tampered with. Inside was a letter with a photo of her house, her bedroom window circled in red marker. Mary felt panic rising but forced herself to breathe. She called the security firm Clara recommended and ordered neighborhood patrols. Then she contacted Sarah, her colleague, and asked for help gathering information on Victor Gray. Sarah said her cousin worked at a financial firm in Denver and could check on Gray. Mary thanked her and sat at her laptop to compile all the evidence. She knew Gray was a new level of threat, and she needed a flawless plan. A few days later, Sarah called with news. Her cousin found documents linking Gray to several offshore companies buying real estate in Colorado, including Boulder Homes. Mary passed the information to Eric, who began working on a new article. He also contacted Paul, who agreed to an anonymous interview. Mary felt the end nearing, but the danger grew. One evening, while checking her cameras, she saw a car stop near her house. A man in a dark suit stepped out. Mary couldn't see his face, but something told her it was Gray. She photographed the car and sent it to Tom. The next day, Tom confirmed the license plate belonged to a company tied to Gray. Mary decided to act. She suggested to Eric that they organize a public exposure of Gray. The plan was to invite him to a fake event, supposedly about real estate, and expose him to journalists. Eric supported the idea and said he could bring in local media colleagues. Mary also asked neighbors to stay alert and record any suspicious activity. The plan gained momentum. Eric sent Gray an invitation to the event from a fictitious company supposedly interested in investing in Boulder. Gray agreed to attend. Mary knew this was her last chance to stop him. She prepared a presentation with all the evidence, documents, recordings, Paul's testimony. Tom arranged for police presence at the event to detain Gray if he tried to flee. On the day of the event, Mary stood backstage, holding a microphone. The room was filled with journalists and locals. Gray entered with 2 bodyguards, smiling as if he owned the place. Mary waited until he sat and began the presentation. She showed documents linking Gray to fraudulent schemes and played a recording of Linda mentioning his name. The room buzzed. Gray tried to defend himself, but Mary played Paul's testimony, confirming his involvement. The police entered and detained Gray. Mary felt her legs tremble but held on until the end. After the event, neighbors threw another party in her yard. They thanked Mary for her courage, and Clara gave her flowers. Mary stood on her porch, looking at the stars, and felt she had won for the first time in a long while. But she knew she'd always be ready for new challenges. Mary sat on her couch, holding a cup of herbal tea. Her Boulder home was quiet, but the silence no longer felt threatening. 3 weeks had passed since Victor Gray's arrest, and the neighborhood was slowly recovering from the turmoil. Eric's article about Gray's schemes went viral, and the city council introduced new rules to protect homeowners from similar scams. Mary received thank-you letters from neighbors and even strangers who read her story. But despite the triumph, she couldn't shake the feeling that something still lurked in the shadows. Linda was in jail, Gray awaited trial, but Mary knew people like them always left traces. She checked her security cameras every evening, though nothing suspicious appeared. Her life was getting back on track. She returned to work, where Ellen, her boss, formally apologized for the unfair dismissal. Sarah, her colleague, became a closer friend, and they worked together on a new marketing project. But one morning, Mary found a letter in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a small sheet with printed text. "You thought it was over?" Mary felt her heart tighten. She immediately called Tom and showed him the letter. Tom examined it carefully and said it might be an attempt by one of Gray's accomplices to intimidate her. He suggested sending the letter to the police for analysis and checking if Gray had other partners they didn't know about. Mary agreed, but asked Tom to also contact Eric to dig through archives. She felt this threat wasn't just a prank. That same day, Mary attended a neighbor meeting organized by Clara. They gathered at the community center to discuss new safety measures. Mike said his cameras caught an unfamiliar car driving past the neighborhood multiple times, and added that someone left a strange package near her house, but she didn't dare open it and called the police. Mary shared the news about the letter, and the neighbors grew worried. Clara suggested hiring extra security, and Mike offered to install cameras on the main street. Mary supported the ideas and urged everyone to stay vigilant. She knew she couldn't let a new threat destroy everything she'd fought for. Back home, Mary checked her cameras and noticed one recording had been deleted. She called the security company servicing her system and learned someone from an unknown IP tried to access her cameras. Mary felt anger rising. She contacted Tom and asked him to check if Linda could access technology from prison. Tom said it was unlikely but promised to talk to the police. He also advised Mary to change all her passwords and install a new security system. She immediately ordered upgrades and asked Sarah to help with the setup. Sarah arrived that evening with pizza. They sat in the kitchen, laughing and reminiscing, but Mary couldn't shake her anxiety. She told Sarah about the letter and the deleted recording, and Sarah suggested contacting her friend who worked in cybersecurity. Mary agreed, feeling every bit of help was invaluable. The next day, Sarah's friend, Nate, came to Mary's house and inspected her system. He confirmed someone had tried to hack her cameras and installed extra protection. Nate also said he could trace the IP if the attack repeated. Mary thanked him and felt slight relief. But that evening, she received another letter. This time, it contained a photo of herself, taken at the office. Mary felt panic rising. Someone was watching her not just at home, but at work. She called Eric and asked him to check for new suspicious people in town. Eric said he'd received information about a woman posing as Gray's assistant. Her name was Caitlin, and she was supposedly looking for new investment properties in Boulder. Mary asked Eric to find a photo of Caitlin, and when he sent it, she recognized the bracelet on her wrist. It was the same bracelet she'd seen in footage with Linda. Mary felt everything falling into place. Caitlin was a new player, possibly hired by Gray or even Linda. She contacted Tom and shared her suspicions. Tom said he'd investigate Caitlin and her ties to Gray. He also advised Mary to avoid walking alone and stay close to neighbors. Mary agreed but decided she wouldn't just wait. She called Clara and asked her to organize another meeting, this time focused on Caitlin. At the meeting, Mary showed Caitlin's photo and asked neighbors to report sightings. Mike said he'd seen a similar woman near the park and then recalled a call from someone with a woman's voice. Mary asked everyone to photograph suspicious cars or people. She knew Caitlin was the key to unraveling the news scheme. A few days later, Nate called with news. He traced the IP used to hack Mary's cameras to a co-working space in Denver. Mary passed the information to Tom, who went to Denver to investigate. At the co-working space, he obtained camera footage showing Caitlin working on a laptop. Tom sent the footage to the police, and Mary felt they were nearing the end. But that evening, she found another letter under her door. It contained a photo of her house, taken from inside, with the words, "We're closer than you think." Mary called the police, but they found no signs of a break-in. She called Eric and asked him to prepare a new article, this time about Caitlin. Eric said he was already working on it and had a witness who saw Caitlin with Gray before his arrest. Mary asked to organize another public exposure, but this time she wanted to be present. She knew Caitlin would flee if she sensed danger. Mary contacted Mike and asked neighbors to watch the neighborhood for Caitlin. The plan was risky, but Mary saw no other way. Eric organized an event at a local hotel, inviting Caitlin on behalf of a fictitious investment firm. Mary prepared a presentation with all the evidence, footage, photos, witness testimony. Tom arranged for police to be on standby. On the day of the event, Mary stood in the room, holding the projector remote. Caitlin entered, smiling, and sat in the front row. Mary began the presentation, showing footage of Caitlin hacking cameras and photos of her with Gray. The room buzzed, and Caitlin tried to run, but the police detained her at the exit. Mary finished the presentation, explaining how Caitlin continued Gray's scheme. After the event, neighbors gathered in her yard again, this time with champagne. They thanked Mary for her persistence, and Clara said the neighborhood would never be the same because of her. Mary stood on her porch, looking at her house, and felt she could finally breathe freely. But she knew she'd always be ready for new battles. Mary stood on her porch, holding a coffee cup, gazing at the snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Boulder woke under a soft winter sun, and her neighborhood, once gripped by fear and suspicion, now seemed calmer than ever. 2 months had passed since Caitlin's arrest, and Mary's life was finally starting to feel normal. Linda, Victor Gray, and Caitlin awaited trial, and their fraudulent schemes became the subject of local news and even some national reports. Mary received an award from the city council for her contribution to community protection, and her story inspired neighbors to form an official homeowners association to prevent future threats. But despite all her victories, Mary couldn't shake the feeling that her fight wasn't over. She knew people like Linda always left threads that could lead to new problems. Every morning, she checked her mailbox with slight anxiety, but no more threatening letters arrived. The security cameras she kept after the events worked flawlessly, and the security firm hired by neighbors patrolled regularly. Mary tried to focus on work, where her new project with Sarah earned praise from clients. Ellen, her boss, even hinted at a promotion, but Mary wasn't quick to celebrate. She'd learned to be cautious. One evening, while preparing dinner, Mary got a call from Eric, the journalist who'd become her steadfast ally. He said he'd received an anonymous letter with information about another of Linda's accomplices still operating in Colorado. Mary felt her heart tighten. She asked Eric to send her a copy of the letter and immediately called Tom. Tom arrived an hour later, carrying a laptop and a thermos of coffee. They reviewed the letter, which contained just a few lines. Linda was only part of it. Look for the shadow in Colorado Springs. No signature, but Mary knew it wasn't a joke. Tom said he'd heard of someone called the Shadow in a Denver fraud case, but thought it was a myth. He promised to check his contacts and reach out to the Colorado Springs police. Mary thanked him, but urged him to hurry. She didn't want a new threat to catch her off guard. The next day, Mary gathered neighbors at Clara's house to discuss the letter. She didn't want panic, but knew transparency was their strength. Mike, who coordinated neighborhood patrols, said he'd noticed a stranger photographing houses in the area, and added that she'd received an email from an unknown address offering to buy her house for cash. Mary showed a copy of Eric's letter and asked everyone to report suspicious activity. Clara suggested contacting local media to spread word of a potential new scheme. Mary supported the idea and decided to work with Eric to expose the Shadow, whoever they were. A few days later, Eric called with news. He'd found a witness who claimed to have worked with someone called the Shadow in Colorado Springs. The witness, Dan, was a courier who delivered documents for fraudulent deals. Dan agreed to talk if guaranteed anonymity. Mary asked Eric to arrange a meeting, and they went to Colorado Springs with Tom. The meeting took place in a small cafe, where Dan sat in a corner, nervously twisting a napkin. He revealed that the Shadow was a pseudonym for a woman named Sophia Marshall, who ran a network of agents in Colorado. Sophia was the mastermind behind the operations involving Linda, Gray, and Caitlin. Dan said Sophia never appeared in person, but he'd seen her once at an office in Colorado Springs. Mary recorded every word and asked Dan to describe Sophia. He mentioned she wore a silver ring with a large black stone. Mary felt her insides tighten. She'd seen a similar ring in a photo Eric had shown her earlier. Back in Boulder, Mary contacted Nate, Sarah's friend who helped with cybersecurity. She asked him to check if Sophia Marshall appeared in any databases. Nate found a few mentions of her in old fraud cases, but no photos or specific data. Mary passed the information to Tom, who began working with the Colorado Springs police to find Sophia. Meanwhile, Mary noticed her house was targeted again. Cameras caught a woman walking nearby, photographing the street. Mary zoomed in and saw a silver ring with a black stone. She immediately sent the footage to Eric and Tom. Tom confirmed it could be Sophia and advised Mary not to stay home alone. She refused to move, but invited Sarah to stay with her for a few days. Sarah arrived with a laptop and jokes, but Mary could see her friend was worried too. They reviewed the footage together and noticed the woman with the ring appeared near the house multiple times. Mary decided to act. She contacted Eric and suggested setting another trap, this time for Sophia. The plan was to lure her to a fake real estate deal, like they did with Caitlin. Eric supported the idea and said he could use his media contacts to make the event public. Mary also asked Mike and neighbors to watch the neighborhood for Sophia. Tom arranged for police to be present at the event. The plan was complex, but Mary felt it was her last chance to end this saga. Eric sent Sophia an invitation from a fictitious company supposedly seeking investors for a Boulder project. Sophia replied that she was interested and agreed to attend. Mary prepared a presentation with all the evidence, footage, Dan's testimony, Nate's documents. She also asked Clara and Ann to be in the room to identify Sophia by her ring. On the day of the event, Mary stood backstage, her heart racing. The room was packed with journalists, neighbors, and local officials. Sophia entered in an elegant suit, her silver ring glinting on her finger. Mary waited until she sat and began the presentation. She showed footage of Sophia photographing houses and played Dan's testimony describing her role in the schemes. The room erupted in whispers, and Sophia tried to stand, but Clara and Ann blocked the exit. Mary continued, showing documents linking Sophia to Gray and Linda. The police entered and detained Sophia, who shouted that it was a mistake. Mary finished the presentation, thanking neighbors and Eric for their support. After the event, the neighborhood threw a grand party in a nearby park. Neighbors brought food, music, and lanterns, celebrating the final victory. Mike raised a toast to Mary, calling her the heart of their community. Clara gave her an album of photos from all the events they'd been through together. Mary stood among friends, holding a glass, and felt she could finally let go of fear. Her house, her neighborhood, her life were safe. She returned home late at night, sat on the porch, and looked at the stars. Colorado slept, and Mary knew she was ready for any challenges the future might bring. Her story became a legend, but for her, it was just life, struggle, love, and victory.